All right, and welcome. This is the TSG Live call-in talk show for March 17th. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. I have green on my screen here. I don't know what you're doing, Jack. Normally I would have Michelle to my right here, but Michelle had an emergency family trip to Maui, of all places. A little jealous about that, but that gives us the opportunity to talk to the one and only Jack Burgess today. So thanks for coming, Jack. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
So in case people are wondering, I'm guessing that most of the people watching probably already know who you are because we have the show that we do together. And I don't know, people usually have heard of you if they're into model railroading because of the various hundreds of articles and other stuff, clinics and everything else that you've done. So I guess that's my way of introducing you. If you want to tell people about yourself, you can, but
well, I'll say a couple words.
Sure.
I modeled Yosemite Valley Railroad, August 1939. Started the layout in 81 and finished it after 31 years. So the layout is finished. A lot of people say, how can you finish the layout? You always have more details to do. No, it's finished. And but I'm still building stuff. I like building stuff. I don't operate my layout. So I scratch build a lot of stuff. So that's what keeps me busy is scratch building stuff.
Yeah, we've actually shown some of those things on the Model Railroading with Jack Burgess video or series, like that crane, the maintenance of way crane. That was pretty cool. People are shocked that it doesn't run on the layout when they find out.
I built a lot of things that don't run on the layout.
Yeah.
All the maintenance of way equipment. The YB had 11 pieces of maintenance of way equipment. The crane, some flat cars, box cars, so forth. And every single one of them has been scratch built. They're all on the layout, but not a single one runs in a train.
Right.
And like I say, I don't go out and play trains all the time. I know model railroaders who do. Jim Vail used to do that. His shop was in where the layout was. And I was told that he'd be working on the workbench and then he'd stand up for a little while and they'd run some trains around. Never cleaned the track because they ran trains every single day.
Yeah.
And then they had operating sessions.
Right. So, don't have to clean it if you got trains running every day. Yeah.
Yep. So the last time trains have been run on my layout was 3 years ago. Yeah. Because in the Bay Area, there's an invitational operating event every 2 years. And this year was canceled because of the virus. So I haven't cleaned track for 2 years. Haven't run a train for 2 years.
Yeah.
And
it was fortunate that you had to clean the track that one time because I remember just prior to doing the layout to our video of your layout, it was actually planned around when it was going to be clean for that Bay Rails.
That's right.
So, right. And I think that was 2016. So it's hard to believe it was already
2017 because it's in the odd years.
Oh, it was 17. Okay.
Well, I don't know.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. Well, I'll go with what you said because it's your layout. Right? So,
it was one of those 2 years.
Yeah, I do want to comment about something as we're kind of getting the show started here. And that is we're going to do things a little bit differently. We are going to take calls like we normally do because what we do, Jack, just so you know, is it's a call-in show. So people can call in with their webcams and ask questions and stuff like that. And then, of course, we're also having the questions and comments pop up on the screen like we normally do out of the text chat. But what I wanted to do, because last month I was talking with Michelle on our regularly scheduled program that she was on, and somehow we got onto the topic of the Achievement Program for the NMRA. And as the conversation was going, I was realizing that I didn't know as much about that as I probably should if I'm going to talk about it, to explain what it is to people. And so I think I mentioned it on the show that we'd have to get someone to come on to who knows about that to talk about it. And then you were the first person that I thought of because I knew that you were the AP chairperson for the Pacific Coast region of the NMRA here. At least I think that's right. Isn't it the chairman of the program or
Yes.
something like that?
I'm the one that's in charge of the region.
Right.
But I don't know. It's not a director. It's not a manager. I don't remember.
Yeah.
But yes, I am in charge of the program and do the sign-offs for people that participate in the program here in the Bay Area. And,
right.
this area.
And you also went through the process to become an MMR. It was a while back, but you did that too.
Yes.
So I figured you'd know something about it more than I do.
Yeah.
So that's originally the idea, was to have you come on with me and Michelle, and we were going to just kind of interview and ask you the questions about it. But then this thing popped up with Michelle where she wasn't available. And in case anybody's wondering, that's how this all came to pass. I called Jack earlier this week and said, hey, you just want to go on for the whole show? And he said, sure. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. So the reason I brought all this up is because just to kind of set people up. So I want to talk to you specifically, Jack, about the achievement program in the beginning of the show. And then after a while, when we've kind of covered all that, or beat the dead horse enough to where people understand what it is and how it works, then we'll take calls after that. So if anybody's thinking about calling in, you're welcome to get in line now if you want to, but just know that it'll be a while probably before we bring you up. And you can ask your questions directly to Jack about the achievement program and the NMRA in our text chat, or wait till we're done talking about it and come on live on a video. So anyway, that's kind of just, I wanted to set people up for that. Just know that if you do call in, that you have to be signed into your YouTube account first, and you have to be sure that you're in a quiet place, know what you want to talk about, and make sure that your camera is on, because nobody gets on, unless I know who they are, nobody gets on that doesn't have a camera on, because, well, it prevents crank calls, So anyway, with that, maybe, tell us about the achievement program, Jack. What would you tell someone who doesn't know what it is or hasn't heard of it or just is curious about it?
Sure. The program was started back in the 1960s and has been very successful. I don't think it's as popular as it was 20 years ago. It's probably because a lot more people don't build things. You have to build things and show what you can do to participate in this program. But I think it's a very valuable program, because what I think and hope it does is encourages people to do a little bit more. There's several categories, and I'll talk about those in a second, but it's basically, as far as I'm concerned, a way to push people to finish stuff. You can look at your layout and say, well, this one requirement says I have to have this much scenery done, and if I do a little bit more, I will have that certificate. And I think it's a feedback program where you do it and you say, well, that was kind of neat to be recognized that I'm good enough to get this certificate. And that's what I encourage in my videos is I'm always taking on more challenging projects, because that's what I enjoy. And when I get all done, I'll step back. Sometimes that means I wake up early in the morning trying to solve problems on a model I'm building. But once I solve them and finish the model, I can't wait to start another model. So basically, the overall idea is that there are 11 categories that you can get certifications in. And I'll go through them and kind of describe them. First one is motive power. In other words, locomotives, building them and so forth. And I'll get more details in a second. And there's also cars. Another one is structures, scenery, prototype models. And I think I was the very first person in the United States to get a certificate for prototype models. The judges came over, looked around at my layout, and signed it. Because everything I had was prototype. Another one for civil, one for electrical, one for chief dispatcher, in other words, operating on layouts. And then the last three One of them is officials. And if you're not an official, you're national or local, you're not going to qualify for that. There is another one for volunteer, which could mean giving clinics and so forth. And then there's one for author. So with that, let me give you more details, and you can kind of look at or listen to what I'm going to say and think about it and think maybe I'm kind of close on some of these. So going back to motive power, you have to build 3 pieces of motive power. It could be steam, diesel, either one. One has to be scratch built. And all 3 of them must get 87.5 points. So that means you can't take something out of a box, add a couple of details, and call it a super detailed that you did a lot of work on it. You know you didn't do any work on it. So I never got that one because I worked with a brass importer and got 5 of the 7 engines I needed brought in from South Korea. And I've had somebody say, well, Jack, why don't you just build a little diesel thing for a friend? I don't want to build something for a friend. I have enough projects for myself. And I would just, so I never even looked at that one. The next one is cars. And you have to build 8 super detailed models of railroad cars. 4 of the 8 have to be scratch built. The other 4 can be just super detailed. So 4 of those could be a basic kit that you add all the brake gear on and all the grab irons and so forth. You have to get 87.5 points out of 125. And let me talk about that for a second. One reason which led me into this is here in the Bay Area, when I got back into model railroading and I couldn't afford kits, just like I couldn't afford track. And so I started building my own boxcars. And I thought I could make them anything I want. I can paint them any color I want. But then I met a guy locally that was going down to the railroad yards and photographing real cars, taking some measurements and scratch building them. And his stuff was really nice. It was 87.5 points, as I recall, if he had judged it. And that really encouraged me I threw away everything I had except one model, just so I could show people, here's how crude the stuff was that I was building 40 years ago, and started doing the same thing. And then I got into contest modeling, going to local conventions and entering contests. And the first thing I did was I built a YV caboose, scratch built it. Still's pretty good. I can do better now because I use styrene. This is all wood. And it took first place for people that had never entered the contest. And I could not afford to go to the convention, even though he's here in the Bay Area. So Bob Brown, the editor of the Gazette, who I knew, took it for me and entered it. And there were some really good modelers in the Bay Area. Gordon Cannon, that came out with Cannon parts for diesels, was a scratch builder, and entering contests, he scratch built a 3-truck Shay. Everything. Every pipe went from where it was supposed to go to where it was supposed to go. If it was a sander and it came down and stopped, he drilled out the bottom so that it actually had a hole there. There was another guy that became contest chairman, and I was a contest judge under him. He scratch built a 280 or 280, I think, or some big locomotive. Everything. He scratch built the drivers, the trucks. On the trucks, the journal boxes opened. And there was no gear on any of the drivers. He actually had a system where it ran through the cylinders, and the cylinders were actually making the engine move.
Wow.
And he was very good. He would never weather anything. But he finally, his painting was not real good, so he actually paid to go to a professional model painter and spend 3 days learning how to paint. But he still wouldn't weather it. And so when he turned in this locomotive, and I challenged him on some things. I think I might got as good as he was because my stuff was weathered, and that was 15 points. And later, 15 points. But I remember he built a gondola car, and he had rivets, but he had 2 pieces of brass for each piece, so there were rivets on both sides. So those kinds of people push me to challenge myself and do better and better and better. So getting back to the AP program, Nexus structures, you have to construct 12 structures, 6 different types. They can't be 6, or excuse me, I think you said right. Yes, 12. You have to have 12 of them. So you can't build 12 houses. You have to have at least 6 different things. 6 must be scratch built. The others can be kits. 1 must be a bridge, either a trestle or something. And you have to get 87.5 points on 6 of them. So you could look around and say, these aren't going to be in a contest, but they're kits. And, I did a really good job. They're neat, they're weathered, they're painted right, and so forth. And so that could work. Next is scenery. And I'm going to give statistics for HO, but if you're O scale, there has to be more scenery. If you're N scale, it could be less. But you have to have 32 square feet. And you're judged on terrain, structures, background, and lighting. And 87.5 points would not be that hard on a layout you work at. You have details, you have some trees, the shrubbery is nice, and so forth. And so that would be a good one to start on, because you don't have to scratch build anything. You just have to build a layout, and you could do it in modules. I'm not sure how you're going to get a backdrop on a module, but I guess you could have some. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That was one of the questions that people were asking or making comments last time when I was talking with Michelle in our chat window. They were saying, "Oh, you have to have a big layout," and I said, "I don't think you have to have a layout at all." I mean, we both know a guy, Jack Gerbovan, I don't think he has his own layout. He's building a bunch of stuff for Seth all the time, and he's working on his MMR. So, the guy that, right.
Yeah, you could build structures for somebody else, have them judged, and you don't have to have things judged in a contest. Right now, a lot of the categories can be judged by Zoom, where you could put a camera up and you have a couple of judges that are watching, and you can explain, what things do and so forth. There are some categories like multi-power. I think multi-power structures and cars, you have to have the judges look at it because you're not going to be close enough. You can hide stuff. You can say, well, here it is, and you never show them the backside.
Right. But the lighting is bad. Sorry about that.
Yeah. But what they suggest is you could set up a meet in a parking lot, and you bring a table out, or you lift the back of your station. People still have station wagons.
I don't think so. I think they're called SUVs now.
Yeah. And you have your models there, and the judges can come over and look at them. And if it was in a contest, you would not be able to talk to the judges. The judges judge. But in this situation, you could talk. You're 15 feet away. The judges say, blah, 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 or they can make some questions, write them out and check with you, like what something. So there is ways to get models judged even now, even a layout. You could have it judged where people come in, you're wearing masks, you're staying social distancing, so forth.
I think one of the things, Jack, that people are intimidated by is that they're being judged. But I don't think that the judging they're not there to tell you, oh, you suck. They're there to tell you what they're looking for, and if it didn't score, why it didn't score, so that the next time you apply for one, you can do it the way they're expecting to see it, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
I was contest chairman after the guy that was scratch building this stuff. I think when he built that locomotive, he burned out because, well, I forgot to mention the only thing that was not scratch built on that big locomotive, the 280, whatever it was, 282, was the light bulb. And he listed that in his form. I bought the light bulb. So after he got scored, people were teasing him and said, "Oh, you had to buy a light bulb, huh?" So the next year he came down and back to the contest and had scratch built a light bulb. And he told people at 11 o'clock, "I'm going to turn it on and prove that it works." And so a whole bunch of us were around, and he turns it on, and about 15 seconds later, poof, but it worked.
Right.
And I saw him at a hobby shop several years later, and he was into modeling airplanes or something. So the next one is prototype models. It can be, it says it can be an animated scene or static. In other words, it could be part of a layout or it can be a display. At least 6 models that are prototypes, so forth. If you're a prototype modeler, you don't have to scratch build everything. You can have a UP engine because you're not getting judged. They're looking at the overall and say, yes, this is prototype and everything fits. If you're modeling 1939, you don't have a 1962 automobile there, that kind of stuff. So the next one, let me turn my page. Next one is civil. So we're talking about design. So you have to do a scale model of a layout, which you're going to actually build. And you have to build at least 50 feet of track. So you don't have to build the whole layout, but you have to design it all. This one is kind of limited, and I shouldn't be saying this, but you have to keep in mind that these criteria were developed in the 60s. And so they were looking at typical layouts in the 60s, which were not prototype. And so the drawing has to have at least so many elements. You have to have at least one spur, one siding, this and this and this and this. I got this award, and there's nothing on my layout that's not prototype, but I was able to get it because I had a lot of spurs. I had a siding, and I had a crossover. One siding is long enough. The prototype did have a crossover, and then I had a 90-degree crossing. So there's my 4, which we haven't talked about yet. But that's civil. So there are a lot of possibilities. I would not design a layout you could design a layout that has stuff in it that you're not going to build. One friend of mine got this certificate. He built a shed in his backyard about 40 years ago. And he still hasn't finished his layout. He says he'd come home from work, they'd have dinner, read the newspaper, and then he didn't feel like going out in this cold 40-foot long building to work on the layout. But he did get back into it. He called me over, and he had a lot of track on the layout, but he was missing some of the elements, so he built those on a piece of plywood. He built a 90-degree crossing, a couple other things. I judged him, and he's good to go.
So it did count. It did count. It just didn't have to be on. So you don't have. Right. So that's the answer to that question. You don't have to have a layout. You can just build the stuff that you're required to build and get it looked at.
Yes. Now,
I have a quick question while you're getting your bearings, if it's okay.
Sure.
So you said in the beginning of this talk that you need to have 11 things, right? And what you're really choosing from is what in those 11 categories, because there's several things in each category, and you just have to have a certain number of what those are, right? But you can pick and choose which ones you do, though, right? Am I understanding that right?
Yes. but you have to have one in certain ones. You have to have one in here, one in here, one in here, and one in here. So there's four of them. There's four categories that you got to have one of something in one.
Okay.
And I had that listed.
I think my point to the question, though, Jack, was that it's not like here's a list of 150 things and you have to do every single one of them to exacting standards.
Oh, no.
It's a list of a whole bunch of stuff, and you can pick the ones. Because, I mean,
Yes.
maybe your layout doesn't need X, Y, Z that's in this category, but it does need A, B, C, which is also in the category. And you want to do the stuff that's relevant to your layout. So you just choose A, B, and C and don't bother with X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
So, for example, in equipment, I didn't want to do multi-power, but I did cars. In settings, I did structures and prototype models and scenery. In operations, in engineering, I did civil and I did electrical. And so out of the 11 categories, you need to do 7.
Oh, okay.
So like service the hobby, I don't think that's a required one because you'd have to be an author or an official. So continuing, there's only a couple more. Chief dispatcher, no way I'm going to get that. But I've had a lot of guys that have submitted the paperwork, and you have to have 50 hours of operation. Doesn't have to be on your layout. It could be on a club layout, a friend's layout. You have to have 10 hours in at least 3 of the jobs. And the jobs are engineer, yard master, hostler, tower man, or dispatcher. And you have to have at least 10 hours as a dispatcher. And so what you do, there's a sheet that you can get online from NMRA, and you put the date, where you were, and have the layout owner sign it. And that's what this guy did. He had way over 50 hours. So it was a simple one that you just go operate on layouts like you want to do, and record it, and you're on your way. And the last group, association officer, volunteer. You can make volunteer. You need 60 time units. That's not 60 hours. You get so many points for each hour given a clinic, so forth. Anything that's a volunteer. If you're a volunteer judge, if you have your layout open for a convention, that's a volunteer. And the last one is author. And need 42 points as author, whatever. I applied for this. I don't know how many articles I had written at that time. That was at 80, some before the 80s. I didn't have that many done. I have over 100 now, or 200. So I could share those with people. And so if you have questions, every state has regions. California has used to be all of California. Now it's split in half. So Southern California is a region. We are a region. I'm the chairman for this region. Other states probably have one chairman. You could go online to the National Multimedia Association. They can tell you how to get in touch with the person in charge of your region. Here in our region, I don't judge. I review the submittals and make sure they're compliant and then sign them off. So there are, I think about 4 or 5, whatever the smaller unit, like here in the Bay Area is Coast Division. There's division above us and so forth. And each one of those has a person that is in charge of the judging. They may have someone else do it, or ideally that person would get together with somebody else, and 2 people or 3 people would go out to judge, especially a layout. If you have contests and they're judged, that's where you can get judged and see if you get 87.5 points. Mm-hmm. So maybe with that,
we can do some questions. Yeah. Sure. You said that you were a judge for a while, didn't you?
Yes. And that was very helpful. It really opened your eyes, because you go into a contest room and you can look at something, you cannot touch it. You can see the sheet that the builder fills out and tells what he did and how he painted it and so forth. And so I started judging, and then eventually my wife was a judge also. And she was really critical. I mean, as critical as I was. And when I remember when I started, they assigned me, you would never start, if you're going to go in and say, I want to volunteer to be a judge, they're not going to just say, here, go do it. They're going to have you work with somebody. And, after maybe 4 or 5 judges or times you've done it, then the contest chairman might say, okay, you have enough experience to do this. But when I started, I was working with a woman who was an inscaler. And like I say, we can pick up the models. And somebody was building a passenger car. And it was an HO. And she picks it up and looks up and she says, I can do better than this in scale.
Oh, that's brutal.
And it was not a very good model. Like, I had not done much. But it makes you really realize what you can do. And I remember another time, we went up to Reno for a convention, and I entered a model. And I walked in with my wife, and I entered the model, and I said, I'm entering it. I don't think it's that good. I think I'm going to get maybe 85 points. It got 86 points. So, I mean, you get enough experience, you can look at something and you can look at your own stuff and say, I was really going too fast. I should have done. Mm-hmm. And that's another way of just pushing yourself to do better.
I wanted to bring that up too, because I think that a lot of people look at contests and that sort of thing as a way to get a ribbon or to get some, award or something. But having our conversations that we've had over the past few years, it sounds to me like it can be just as much of a motivation just to do better, because, yes. Right? Because someone's going to look at it critically. So you want to push yourself to do better.
Yep.
And that makes sense to me. Now, if you want to talk about that, talk about using the process as a way to motivate yourself, I think is a topic, because you've done that, right? I mean, it's not, it's never been about the blue ribbon as much as it's been about how good can I make this, right?
And there's some people that don't like to be judged. And this program is not for them, because everything you do is going to get judged. Mm-hmm. But I look at it as feedback. And a lot of people would do this is on the contest forum, they would make a note under painting, next time do this or try it. And you can have a person, the person's entering it, can go talk to the judges. I had people do that. They're not, I didn't ever consider it a challenge. I didn't like the score you gave me, but it's a way of getting feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sydney was mentioning earlier, well, there's a comment that she put up now, but she was mentioning something else about having you comment about, can you bring that back up, whatever you said about commenting it? Yeah, address some of the things that people are intimidated by, which you just did about being judged. But what would you say to someone who's like, well, I'm not even going to get started because I just don't have time, for example? And
So the list is on the next post.
I think in a way, you also address that too, because you talked about having models that you've already done and looking at them and going, say, I could just enter this because it qualifies under these categories, right?
Yeah. Well, to address the first comment, I know there's people that say, well, as soon as I retire, I'm going to start this huge 60 by 60 layout. Ain't going to happen. And everybody has priorities, of course, But I have a friend that would set aside 1 hour a day, and he's a YV modeler. That's how I know him. And they would have dinner. It wasn't even an hour, it was 30 minutes. He'd have 30 minutes to work on his model, and he was always set up, so he doesn't have to push things away, get it out, get the tools out. I mean, he just sits down and works on it for 30 minutes, and then they go watch TV together. And he did some really nice models. I have not seen them close up, but large stations, very clean. And just from the photos, he's got an 87.5 point model right off the bat. I can tell. So I think people that say they don't have the time have different priorities. If my wife said, I don't have the time to do that, she's not listening. I would say, then don't
Are you sure?
Don't spend so much time on Facebook. I mean, that's what she likes to do. She has a lot of people she talks to and whatever in Facebook. I don't do Facebook. She created a Facebook page for me, and there's nothing in it, and I never look at it. And if I looked at it, I have to answer questions.
I'm friends with you on Facebook.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that.
I am. Yeah, thanks for friending me, Jack.
Well, I'm on a couple of chat lists. One is a steam freight car list, and one is a prototype model. And so I'm getting about 30 or 40 emails a day on those. I don't read them. I'll look subjects. Are they still talking about that? They've been talking about that for a week, and I select all, hit the shift button, and they go into they don't even go in the trash. They disappear. But the steam air freight cars, that one started, it was really good. And if you're modeling even resin kits, you could go on something like that and say, I want to build this car. Can someone help me with what kind of brake gear it had? Is it KC or AB or whatever? So some of that stuff is good. And if you do, what you're doing is you're saying, I want to build a better model.
Right.
When it's done, I want to be proud of it and know the brake gear is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Me. And every single car on my railroad has full underbody detail, because that's my standard. But Richard Hendrickson, who passed away maybe a decade ago now, was an unbelievable expert. I think he had 60,000 photos of freight cars. And his layout, his vision for a layout, I think he started it, he may have even done it, was you have a layout which is a big circle, no scenery or anything. And in front, it has a screen. And so you're looking like seen in a movie screen. And all you see is a backdrop and some 3 or 4 tracks coming across. And what he would do, he would have 100-car trains all set up, and you sit there and have a beer and just watch one train after another go by with all these freight cars. And that's what he wanted to do. But he never added underbody detail because he just wants a lot of freight cars. So, I mean, there's all kinds of variations and ways you can do it. And I kind of got off subject of being judged and so forth.
That's okay. I mean, I figured the conversation will go wherever it goes. So we have a caller, although now I've lost his video. So why don't we go to, there's actually another caller. So why don't we go to Fran first? You ready?
I am.
Okay.
I am ready.
You are ready.
Welcome. Fran. Hi, Fran.
How you doing?
This guy lives about 3 blocks from me.
Yeah,
Right?
I could just look out the door and yell the question. But, what I'm wondering, I have not been active for several years, and how far back can accomplishments be judged? If I have a scratch-built engine from 5 or 6 years ago or 10 years ago, is that eligible to enter?
Absolutely. Anything you've ever built is you can be judged on. So yeah, there's no time limit.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it. You'll have
I'm
to
looking
refer me to another judge.
Pardon?
You'll have to refer me to another judge when it comes down to it. Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Was that all you had, Fran?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'll be in touch with you and email about the other topic we're emailing about.
Great.
Thank you. Take care. Okay, let's go to James next. James, good afternoon. How's it going? Oh, you're muted, James. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, had a lot of echo just a moment ago. Anyway, Fran kind of asked a little bit of that just now, but my question was, Jack, what are your thoughts on using the different certification levels to basically like enhance existing layout or an existing finished model or something you would be considered or that you would consider finished? Is it better to start from scratch for certifications or to pick up where you kind of already are at?
When you say scratch, are you talking about starting over or
like a blank slate?
It's a hard question because, for example, judging your layout, the whole layout doesn't need to be judged. You need so many square feet. And so what you could do is if you look at your stuff and you're saying, I know I can do better, then you might want to take a section of your layout you haven't started yet and say, okay, I'm up in the ante. I'm going to really try hard to produce something I'm really proud of that can be judged and then go from there. So, I mean, you could, on the layout, the structures are not judged with their scratch builder kits or anything else. The overall look is judged. And there are points, you would go through and scenery is worth 30 points or something. And the judges would say, well, it's really good. And the hard part is judging because you're a judge is kind of thinking, this is really good for our area. And I have to tell you, my wife and I, we were somewhere in the Midwest. I don't even know where it was. And a guy was an MR. It was, he had got his certificate as a master model railroad. That's what I was trying to say. And we went in and looked at this layout. It would not meet here in the Bay Area where the standards are so high and we have some beautiful layouts and a lot of them. It wouldn't get that, it wouldn't do as well. And it doesn't seem fair, except a person in the Midwest is doing what everybody else does. That is example. So like maybe if you have our automobiles are going to judge, you can't judge a cheap Chevrolet against a Maserati and have them in the same contest. Yeah, this one has all these automatic features. It drives itself. This Chevrolet doesn't do squat. But I'm not driving a Maserati, so so you get the idea. You just kind of look at yourself and say, can I do better, or is this really good? You think it's good enough? From there.
All right.
That's it. That's interesting. I don't think a lot of people realize it's almost like you're grading on a curve in a way.
Absolutely.
If different regions. So I guess, James, if your modeling sucks, you could move someplace else and enter it. You might get to be a master. I'm just making a joke, obviously, but
Yeah.
Well,
because my layout currently, with the expansion that I'm doing, happens to fit that 32 square feet exactly.
Oh,
So
cool.
Reading over the certification stuff earlier today kind of made me realize I might be able to actually get that one with a little bit of work.
yeah, good.
All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, James.
That what we were just talking about reminds me again another story. I can tell stories for a long time. The same guy that built everything but the light bulb. I asked him one time because he would get in our contest because of his painting and lack of weathering. He would get, I 123 out of 125, in that range. And so I asked him one time, what was the most points you ever got on a model? He says, 135. I said, 135? You only get 125. He says, well, my job was sending me to St. Louis or someplace, and it turned out they were having a get-together, and it was an NMRA meet. And so I took one of my models, and what they were doing is it was the same modelers every time. And so George would walk in, and they would judge his model right then. Yeah, Judge, this is really good. This is better than last time. Last time you got 120, so we're giving you 125. Well, my friend walks in, and they see this model that blew everything in the room out of the water.
Oh, so they had to, huh?
Yeah, and you have to, when you judge, you have to write in ink, so you can't go back and erase it. And so they had to give him 135 points because they'd already given 125 to one of their friends. So,
I have a question. It popped up a few minutes ago. Someone was asking how 3D printing, or if 3D printing is factored in. So would a 3D print, because you have to design, right? I mean, we've done programs, you and I have done programs about 3D design, and that's at least as hard as scratch building something, I think, right?
Yes, and I don't know if they've completely addressed it correctly. Several years ago when it first got started, I think the standard was you have to draw it yourself and you have to push the button. And I argued, if you can't, the stuff that we are doing, you can't do on a home printer. I know people that have one or have them. They say they're doing really good, but they're not printing the kind of stuff that I draw. And so you're being shipped off. So I think if I were judging, I would say that is scratch building, because you're designing it yourself and you're doing all the work, the 3D work. So it's different than just buying something from a store because you want something a little different. So I think it would be.
Yeah, that's interesting because, like I said, I've seen the complexity of some of the drawings that you've done on your CAD program or SketchUp or whatever you call it. And I mean, just drawing it, I would think would be enough because you're designing as an engine, as a mechanical engineer. You're designing something that's going to be physical. So I don't see why that wouldn't count. But I'm also not the guy. So
yeah.
So someone is asking if you can get judged in different areas. So I think what he means is different regions, like you were talking about your friend that got the 135. So I guess if you live close enough to a different region, you could take your model and have it judged by them, is what he's asking. Is that correct?
Yeah. I've never had that happen. As long as I've been chairman, but certainly people are getting them judged in other regions because what you end up doing is submitting your contest form to prove they got 87.5 points or more for the model. And that's part of the paperwork. So
right. And I think that you could actually pretty easily, if you go to conventions, because they always have the model room at conventions, and those are judged on the same scale, aren't they, by the local guys? So you could do that. Yeah.
Well, at a national, the national chairman judge is in charge, but he pulls people from local people or people that are going to come. I think I've judged at nationals before. Can't remember for sure, but I'm pretty sure I did.
So. Somebody's asking about. I'm going to bring this up because I saw it in the comments. Let me try that again. Because this brings up an interesting point, and if you don't mind, I'd like to answer this question.
Sure.
This is someone that I know. His name is Heath, and he's saying that it sounds like you need to research your specific area rules and specific rules for your judges. My comment to that is I don't think so, Heath. I think what you need to do is just do your best modeling and don't worry about, I mean, I guess if you're trying to game the system, you could find out who the judges are and find out if they're easier on certain things and try to enter. But I mean, that sounds like more work than just doing the model. Sorry,
Yeah.
I don't know. How would you react to that, Jack?
Well, first of all, I would think that would be cheating. And so, like if you were in school and you got 95 points out of 100 on a test, but 4 times during the test, you looked over and saw what somebody else wrote down and changed what you were writing down. Would you be happy? Look, Mom, I got 95 points, but 12 of them were because I was cheating. And so this is not a test. It's not a life test or anything. It's a hobby. And so what you do need to do is tell the judges what you did. And there is a limit. I have seen 2 or 3 paragraphs talking about scratch building, and it didn't go to the extent that I grew the tree and cut it down and made my own wood, but just about. The judges, you need to have sentences that tell 14 or about, I shouldn't exaggerate, 5 things in one sentence. And so there is a limit. People will only read so far and then they start skipping. I have done I think I showed you my log car. It was Proto 48, and I had that in a contest. And the forum is a 1 page. And so you've got only this much room to talk about construction, which is the most important one. And so what I did is I had supplemental. I had 1 paragraph, but then I had photos of the model while it was under construction, so they can see, oh, yeah, I can see that's brass, this is styrene, here's details that he put on the model that he then covered up with a roof, whatever. So it's very important to tell the judges what you did. And one of them is prototype. And so if you include a plan, even if it's out of a magazine, here's the plan I used to build this model, and photographs. Here's the photograph of the actual building that I built. And so they can say, it looks like the building. No one's going to take up a ruler and measure the windows and so forth. Are the proportions right? So
I guess it sounds like they just need to be, it just needs to look right? I mean, if they're not going to pick it up, I mean.
Well, they will. Yeah, the judges will. Because if it's a car, I want to see underneath. Yeah. Have you got the brake gear, and do you have all the pipes? The brake gear without the pipes doesn't get you a lot of points. You're going to lose points.
Right. Someone's asking if one item can be judged in more than one category. I thought of a way that it would work. I don't know if it's legitimate or not. So can I give an example?
Sure. Yeah, because I don't understand the question that well.
Well, what I'm thinking is, say I built a prototype boxcar and I entered it and I got my 87.5 points on it. Now say I use it in my scene, because you said there's a scene or a scene one, right?
Absolutely.
So it could be part of something else that I could be judged on, but maybe not necessarily. I wouldn't enter it twice into to get. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but someone could cheat, couldn't they? Couldn't they get their 87.5 points on just out of the blue? UP number 103751 here, and then take it to some other place and enter it there and get another certificate? Or do they cross-reference those when they're going to award stuff? Say
it's cars. You have to build so many cars, and so many have to be scratch built. We want to come and see those cars, or we want to see photos. So, theoretically, somebody could have a box car, and here's number on, and then they turn it around, it's a different number. See, it's a different car. There's 2 cars. It's the same car. You're cheating again. Is that how you run your life? So,
Right.
but you could take those cars that were prototype cars and have them as part of the project for the prototype, and also the section of the layout. You can have, if you had structures there that were in the contest and you did really well on them, they're going to make your layout look that much better when the layout is that 32 square feet of layout. So it is possible it's certainly possible to incorporate models, judge them as a contest model, and then judge them as another section.
Right. That was the only sort of, I guess, loophole that I could think of in using the same model for two purposes when you're going for your certificates. So this is another question. Judges give feedback. Oh, yeah, I think you talked about this, but he's asking if judges are allowed to give feedback. And if you come up short in an area, they don't hide where you came up short because they want you to get better, right?
Absolutely. And a good judge, say everything was great, the painting was great, but it's a boxcar and it's an old boxcar and it wasn't weathered. I mean, you can model something that's brand new, but if you weather it, you're putting yourself at risk of not doing a good job. And maybe that's why you don't want to weather. That one guy, he would not weather things. He just would not do it. But if you do weather, you're going to get more points. And so if you enter something and it's gloss paint, a good judge will say, you might think about putting on a flat coat and doing a little bit of weathering. And say you get 84 points. You do that and you come back and you get at least 87.5 points because you put more work into it, it's more realistic, and you did a good job.
Is it a common thing, Jack, for someone to bring a model, say to a meet or something, to get judged, and it doesn't get the 87.5 points, so they take your feedback, go back, change, and do whatever, applying the feedback that they got? Can they bring, or do they bring that same model back and get a new score on it, or do you have to start with a whole different model?
Oh, no, you can bring it back. What I would do then is rewrite your entry form and fill in. Now you can fill in, I also weathered it with chalks, and point that out. So,
right.
And you'd have to bring it back because the previous time you entered it, it had a final score and the judges signed off on it. So you need to just come back to the contest with a new form.
Mm-hmm. I can hear Emery howling at you.
That's our cat.
Right?
Oh, you know why?
Is it time to eat?
No, it's cocktail hour, and he gets a treat when I make my cocktail, and you can hear it. My wife will go, she's going to take care of him.
Well, she ought to bring in your cocktail so that you have something. Something to.
Well, it's not 5 o'clock yet. It's 1 minute to 5.
Oh yeah, you don't want that too early, I guess.
I mean, he's getting better. A few days ago, it was 5 minutes to 5, and yesterday was 3 minutes to 5. The cat knows how to tell the time.
Yeah, and what's funny is we just changed our clocks.
I know. He's struggling with that. Yeah, he was struggling with that a week ago. Okay, back on subject.
Yeah, there's another. Yeah, right. There's another comment here that Garrett is saying. What comes to my mind when crossing categories is logging railroad flat cars with logging cabins on them. Oh, I see what he's saying. Then when moving to different areas, right? It's rolling stock and a structure. That's a good point. Could that be counted as such? You know what he's talking about, where when they move the log camps and they put all their temporary housing on the flat cars?
You could, but when you have them together, you have the capability of more points. A little rolling stock cabin, a lugging cabin, is not going to get 87.5 points because there's not enough work there. It's small. It's got one door, two windows. You know, what was the risk? You didn't take any risks. So logging already, I can see, I've long thought that, and I don't want to discourage people that are into logging, but it's harder because you don't turn locomotives around. So you don't have a Y, you don't have a turntable. You don't have to have a passenger car. It used to be, I think, you had to have a model passenger car. When I was looking at it yesterday, it's a caboose or a passenger car. But there's logging railroads that didn't have cabooses. So they need to take a look at that and see, you know, I don't know how much maintenance away equipment logging railroads had. They must have had some.
Sure.
You know.
Huh. Well, I have a question. It's come up a few times. At least I've seen it a few times in the chat. And people are talking about a Golden Spike Award or Golden Spike. What is that?
That's a entry level that I just signed one off.
Are you sure you do what you were signing?
Well, nothing is judged. You fill out this form and you say, I've done this and this and this and this. And you send it to me and I sign it and I send you a certificate. So it's kind of an entry level. There's no judging.
What kind of stuff do you have to do to get that?
I can't even remember. There's not that much interest. And in fact, nationally, there's been an uptick in people working toward master model railroader because they're home. And the hobby, I read an article in the paper a month ago, and it was actually in England, but manufacturers they're really going gangbusters. People buying a lot of stuff. So the Golden Spike is a way to kind of get into it.
Sort of getting started, sort of?
Yeah. So when people get the paperwork signed off and I receive it, what I do is I review it, log it, and unless I have questions, I scan it and send it to the guy above me. He sends me a certificate. I put it in a frame and mail it to the person. Once you get master model railroader, then we're talking a big thing. You might want to show that.
Oh, we have one of those here. Let me bring that up. Like that?
Like that. So you're looking at a document. This thing was about 11 inches high. It weighs a lot. It's mahogany or something. It's a really nice thing. And what they try to do is give these at conventions.
Right. So there's an honor to it, sort of.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, people have done a lot of work to get these, and so they like to have the recognition. What I do is here in our region, they have a bulletin that comes out, like
the turntable?
20-page magazine. Comes out every 4 months or every 3 months. And in there, I always have a full article on some aspect of the AP program. And then I list who got a Golden Spike in that last period of time and who's got certificates and what certificates they have done and so forth. So the recognition is fine. It's nice.
It's funny, Jack, as much as I've been to your place and spent time while we're making our videos, I don't think I've ever seen this plaque anywhere. Where do you hide that?
It's right behind that bridge that got crushed.
Is it? That's interesting. I've never noticed it before. I'll have to look for that next time. I would point out too that you're a pretty low number. 136 is going back a ways. What does it say? 1988?
Yeah.
Wow.
88.
That's been a while. That was 33 years ago?
Yeah.
I'm doing the math right?
Yeah, you're pretty close.
Something like that. Wow.
And right now there are about 400 master model railroaders.
Oh no, there's more. I looked at the list recently. It's almost up to 700.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost up to 700.
Yeah, what I would imagine, what I envision, is when I mail a certificate, frame certificate to model railroader, that they put it up in their layout room.
Right.
Here's 12 of them or 5 of them, going across.
Yeah, that would make sense. As a matter of fact, I've seen stuff like that hanging in people's layout rooms.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm trying to remember now if I've actually seen them hanging in a layout when I did a layout tour or something like that, and I don't remember having seen them. But yeah, interesting. This is a funny question. I think I know the answer to this one. Would you consider going through it again just for fun?
Well, it would be hard to do because I have only 4 passenger cars to build, and that's not a separate category. And so I would have to enter stuff that I've built since.
Right.
And the most recent stuff I've been scratch building, the crane would probably do fine. Actually, some of the side dump, because that was a lot of work, but that was all 99% of that was 3D printed. And if a judge said, we don't count 3D printing as scratch building, I would get all I'm getting judged on is the 2 trucks. So,
well, you said something earlier that I want to go back to, but before I do, I want to direct your attention to the comment here that Sydney is making, which is I see a need to revamp the program with some modern elements, because I'm going to tell you a quick story that I was a little surprised by. When I was at the national convention in 2019 in Salt Lake City, we were doing a layout tour of the Fremo modular layout that was set up in the train show. And as I was talking to this guy from Southern California, I forget his name now. I think it was Jerry Bill, very, very talented modeler. Some couple of guys come walking up and they say, "Oh, we think that you should become a master model railroader because your modeling is beautiful, and here's best in show awards and other stuff," that they're just handing out to this guy. And as they were talking, I'm thinking to myself, "Oh, maybe I can help this guy out." And I said, "Hey, does it count if he is on a video, doing a layout tour?" And one of the guys there said, "Oh no, that doesn't count. It's just YouTube," or something like that. But I'm not sure that people at the NMRA necessarily realize what social media has become. And that goes along with what Sydney's talking about. 3D printing, videos as articles. I mean, because like, for example, we do the videos together, the model railroading with you, with Jack Burgess videos. And really it's a clinic. I mean, shouldn't that count as a clinic? Because you're presenting the same kind of information. Like, do you see a need for them to update that stuff? Like, what do you think about that?
Yes, but also clinics, whether virtual or in real life, do count toward author. So what is the one that would be hard to do is if you did a layout, if you, John, did a video on a layout and the owner didn't share anything. He just said a few words, the layout is beautiful. Is that a teaching moment? Because that's what a clinic is. A clinic is to share information and teach people how to do things. Mm-hmm. So it could, certainly YouTube videos could, that how to weather. I don't know how many, there must be 1,000 of them. I've never looked at them, but there's a lot of videos on scenery and so forth, which are all good because the magazines are not doing it anymore. People are not buying magazines like they used to.
Yeah, subscribership is way down on all the printed ones. I've been told.
Yeah.
So, yeah, our friend Andy is saying that points are already awarded for video presentations. I didn't know that, and apparently the guy that I talked to at the convention didn't know that either, because he was just poo-pooing the whole idea.
Yeah.
Or
Well,
maybe it has changed since then. I don't know.
Well, and the people talking to him may have been aware of the AP program, and if he'd never heard of it, it's going to go right over his head.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I was a little bit. I was kind of pissed at the guy because he just poo-pooed YouTube like it's some. He's like, oh, well, just people doing stupid videos with their phones. It's like that's not what I do. I was kind of angry with the guy, and then he left, and then the other guy who was with him is like, oh, I'm sorry about him, and I should have taken names so I knew who I was talking about, just so that I'd remember, because you never know when somebody might need a favor. Okay, so someone's asking a question. Oh, this is a comment, which he raises a good point. This is our friend Dave saying that he doesn't need a magazine because he can find videos on any subject matter to help him with his layout. And he makes a great point. That's true. That's like the videos that we make together, Jack. That's what part of the intention is, to help people with their layouts, get people trying stuff.
Well, we've done videos on subjects that I have written articles about.
Layout design was one of them.
Yeah, and I think we did one on we did one on the weed burner.
Oh yeah, that was one of the more recent ones.
Yeah, and that was a 2-part article in the Gazette. So in the article, I can go into a lot of detail, and people that say, I didn't get that, so they could read that over again. And in fact, coincidentally, I had a guy email me maybe a week ago and asking about bob wire. And in that Gazette article, I talked about how I made a tool to make bob wire. And I actually twisted my wire and put the barbs in. And in the video, I think we have close-ups of that bob wire.
Yes,
and so I took my Word document and printed out exactly what I did. And the guy had a couple more questions. And then yesterday he emailed me and said, is this what your tool looked like? And it was. And I said, I didn't say your handle is bigger because I think I had a little handle. But today he sent me photos of his bob wire. And so he was able to do that because the article went into more depth than we can do in a video. So I think they both have their place.
I see what you're saying. Well, I mean, I guess you could go into that kind of detail, but how many people are going to watch as you're building a machine to make O-scale barbed wire? I mean, most people would tune out. One of the challenges, I think, when we're making videos is just that. What do you put in and what do you not put in? Because what you don't want to do is have someone watching and give them a reason to change onto some other channel. You want to have them engaged, right? So that they stay watching what you're showing, so that they get all the information. So I see what you're saying. With an article, you don't have to worry about that. I mean, people will skip over it, but they're still holding the magazine is the point.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, there's a limit what we can do in videos. I can show you the result of what I've done and talk about it and, for 3 minutes, but you can't sit there. Hey, John, come over because I'm going to work on my boxcar, and you can videotape for 2 hours and get a few cuts and see how I do things.
Well, I mean, what you do is you just videotape the whole thing and then speed it up so those 2 hours only take 20 seconds, right? And then people wonder how you do it so fast.
Yeah.
So, but actually, that is something that we could talk about if people are interested, because we aren't getting a lot of calls right now. If anybody's interested in hearing us talking about making the videos together, or if you have other questions about Jack's layout, we don't have to talk strictly about the achievement program. We can talk about anything that maybe you had a question about. Maybe there's a video coming up, or maybe there's a video you'd like to hear that you'd like to see. That's model railroading with Jack. Feel free to call in or put the comments to that in our chat section here. Here's someone. oh, this is interesting, and I think this is a personal decision, really. But how do you choose what to model and what not to model when it comes to a prototypical layout? You had to do that because your space was limited, Jack. How did you decide?
Well, I wanted to build, I guess, let's start with stations. And so I wanted to build the station needed for every place that I had on the layout. Now, some places I didn't model because there might have been a station there, but there was very little need for it. They'd never kick off a boxcar there or whatever. But I ended up building those later.
But not for the layout, though. Let's be clear about that. These are structures that never made it onto the layout.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. In fact, I'll share a problem I had is at Incline, I wanted to have the station. It was on my drawing and so forth. But when I was doing my drawings doing the drawing for the layout, I had a lot of information, but not everything that I might want. And so when I got to Incline, I realized I hadn't left enough room for the station. So I actually removed the fascia, replaced it, pulled it further out into the aisle in order to provide room for the station. But see, that problem then leads to, okay, I'm not going to start a layout until I have all the prototype information I need. If I have plans for every station, I know how big they were, and then you never get started. And I've shared on a couple of the videos buildings that I built. One of them I built 3 different times because I kept getting more information. And and you're talking about limited space. And if you're talking really limited space, maybe you do a module. You could do a module that is a station area with all the tracks right there. And then you do another module that's something else. So that might help.
Yeah, what I'm thinking when I hear that question is, on this 77, I think, mile line between Merced and Yosemite, you had probably, 15 or 16 stations, something like that. I'm just throwing out round numbers. Yeah. Am I close? Maybe 20?
Maybe 15, yeah.
Okay.
Somewhere in that area.
But on your layout, you have, in order, you have Merced, you have, I guess the interlocking is kind of a station if you want to look at it that way. You have Merced Falls. I'm going in order here. You have Bagby.
This is a test.
Right. Emory, Incline, and at the top, El Portal.
Yeah, but there's no station at Emory.
Well, right, but it's a place, right? It's a place on the line. So the question that I have is, why those? Why not Mountain King? Why not? There's another B one that I can't remember the name, but I just had it in my brain. I can't think of it now. Right, I can't think of it. But, yeah, but why the ones that you picked? Is it because of the operational interest? You wanted to be able to put cars there, or
Yeah, it was to have a layout that had a lot of switching, and not enormous, not switching, not somebody that's not going to be switching all day like a hump yard, but be able to have a long enough run between stations so that every station is on a different wall. You don't have any place where there's 2 stations on a wall, where the caboose is in one place and the Barrett.
That was the one that's what I was trying to think of. I'm over here, Bixby, Butthole. I mean, I can't think of these things.
Well, see, and now Barrett was used for meats, but there was absolutely you never left a boxcar there. Right. There was no industry there. It was a station that replaced a station that was on the whole thing before they had to relocate some stuff.
Right.
So I'm not sure where I was going on this now. This number of stations, though, there's a lot of room for Merced and El Portal because those were the ends of the railroad. And there are switching opportunities in the other places. And during operating sessions, one of the trains will go and drop a boxcar at Bagby. Well, they did that because there was a gold mine nearby. Now, Mountain King, I have a friend in Holland, and he is engrossed in Mountain King.
Yeah.
And I helped him draw up plans for the buildings. And he did a Zoom thing, which was really interesting to me, on what happened over generations, the changes and so forth. But when I started my layout, I had no information about Mountain King at all. And in fact, I came up with a system for indexing my photos. And I said, okay, I'm going to have a 5-digit number. First 2 numbers are the place. So that Merced is 10, and I can have up to 999 photos of that station. And then the Santa Fe interlocking is 11, and this is 12, and so forth. And I knew nothing about the area between Bagby, or between Merced Falls, which is on the first layer, and Bagby on the second layer. I had no information. I didn't know what was there. And so that is, all those photos are in one area. And so Mountain King is mixed up with Pleasant Valley and so forth. I can't go back and fix it now, but so a lot of it was just what I knew, what I had information on.
Mm-hmm. Oh, here's an interesting, it's a compliment, actually. You see that comment that popped up?
I'm reading it.
He's a huge fan, and
Well,
it's helped him become a better model railroader.
That's why I write magazines and do videos.
That was the point, right?
That's absolutely the point.
I mean, I got to be honest. When we get together to do videos, it's a lot of fun too. I mean, it's not, to me, I was telling Jack before we got started, it never feels like work to me. I mean, we're just making jokes and cutting it up and just having a great time. And in the end, we ended up with usually a really good video. The content is top notch. The editing and filming is top notch.
I would have finished your sentence if you stopped for a second.
Right. I'm just having fun now. But the point though is, at the end of the day, my whole channel's about showing people stuff they don't get to see, and hopefully that will encourage them or inspire them to do something different or try something new. That's what these shows are about. We've talked about that before, Jack, that you want to inspire people to try something and push themselves to do something. And I do think from the comments that the videos receive here on YouTube that it's working, because I see comments like that one that was up here a minute ago about, people who get inspired to be better at what they're doing. And those comments to me really make it more worthwhile, and I want to do more when I see those, because that was the whole point. I
want to share something I don't think I've ever mentioned before, but I met my now wife in 1981 when she went to work for my boss. And a few days or maybe a week after she got there, somebody else that worked with me was talking to her, and she mentioned that she had an in-scale layout when she was in her early 20s. And he said, well, Jack has a model railroad in his garage. Maybe you should go see it. And she is a very attractive woman. And she was married but mentally separated at the time. And she came in and asked if she can come over and see my layout. And she came over, and this was 81. I started it then. So I had all the bench work was in, the main line was in, some structures that I had built before I started were in, and she was blown away. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I cannot believe I'm meeting a woman that likes model railroading in trains. and model railroading is a major portion of my life. I get unbelievable pleasure from what I do. I I'm never sitting there around thinking, oh, what am I going to do today? You know, I can read some magazines or something. I'm always got stuff I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be anything. If it's golf, if your hobby is golf and you golf once a year, it's not your hobby. Something you do once a year.
Mm-hmm.
So to be a hobby and to be fulfilling, you got to spend some time on it.
Right.
Make it a priority. You know, can't take priorities over lots of other things, but it can still be very important.
Yeah, there's a comment here from Joe. He's been a viewer for a long time, and I think he's even made comments on our shows that we've done together, and he's thanking you for getting him back into scratch building after a 5-year hiatus. How cool is that?
Very, very cool. Thank you.
That's right. That's what it's about, man. Getting people to do stuff that they haven't done or haven't tried. I can be honest. There's been times. Well, I mean, I'll get around to it one of these days. But you gave me some models a while back, kit models, that I want to get around to building them someday, and I will. I still have them. Sydney's in the process of building one, but she's been working on it for about a year now. I'm starting to wonder if it's ever going to get done.
I have a lot of other things on my plate.
She has other things she's doing, she says. So Yosemite Valley Garden Railroad is one of the train crew members on Patreon. He wants to know if you're ever going to be offering YV decals again, specifically O scale.
I never offered him an O scale, and I've run out of a lot of the HO ones. I worked up, and I needed decals for my own stuff. And so I started probably back in the 70s. The first set that I had done, one of the guys that started, I'm not going to mention because I can't remember the name of the company, but he got some bunch of people together, and we bought space on a sheet, and so I could do some decals. The next guy got this, and we did 25 sets, and so that gave me 25 sets of my decals, and then I started working up artwork. And in fact, for locomotives, I have a photo that somebody was thinking about me. They went up to the tender of an engine and shot a straight on view. In Photoshop, I can straighten it out a little bit, get it to scale, turn it into black and white, and that's the artwork I used. And so I printed up, and the minimum order was 25 sets. And I was going through a guy who retired a few years ago. And so I was buying sets through him. But the person that asked, get in touch with me, go to my website, there's an email address there, or go through John, whatever, and I can give you artwork. And there are companies now, Katie will do a single sheet. And I don't know how good their stuff is, but I've got the artwork. And so I can do, and all my artwork, I did not draw it HO, I drew twice HO, which is close to O scale. So it can be done.
Sure. Yeah, I know who that guy is. I don't believe I've met him, but he's making a garden railroad that's going to be based on the YV. So he's been a member of the TSG train crew on Patreon for probably at least a year now, I think. Seems like a super nice guy. I think he's in the East Bay too, Jack. So probably not far from where you live.
Yeah.
There's another comment there. This is from our friend Mike that he says he's a prototype modeler because of you. And I think we know that's true. I mean, he's been inspired. He's made no secret of it, you know. And I saw some pictures recently. I don't know. Well, if you're not on Facebook, you didn't get to see this, but Mike recently finished the Sierra number 28 scratch built model. It looks really good.
Yeah.
I mean, it has all the piping and stuff on it. And I've seen the real 28, and I'm not a rivet counter, so I can't, you know, if you show me a picture and it has a lot of details on the model, I'm impressed by it. I don't sit there and go, oh, but that's curved wrong right there. It should be 6 inches back, you know, or whatever. So just seeing the pictures of the model and having seen the number 28, it's a very convincing model. I wish there was a way that I could show that on here, because I'd like to show it to you and you could see that the result of your inspiration on Mike's modeling, because it was very impressive.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll see if I can find that while we're talking, or if somebody calls in, I can look for it while you're talking to whoever calls in. Is there anything?
This
Yes, go
comment
ahead.
here, I have to also tell you that I don't know how long ago it was, 20 years ago maybe, my wife started a garden railroad. And she was really into the gardening, and she was building a few kits. She built a couple buildings and so forth. And Andy Sprandio was the editor of Model Railroader magazine at that time. And he came over for an operating session or something and saw her garden railroad and got her aside and said, "Jackie, would you write an article for a Model Railroader about your garden railroad?" And she did. But she had to tear it up. She injured her back, and so it's gone. But we still have all the cars and everything.
Right.
Can't throw everything away.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think we showed some of that stuff on the last episode of Model Railroading with Jack Burgess, because we were looking at what's under the layout.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
Right. People seem to like that one. I thought that was kind of cool, because that was stuff that you just don't see. People don't see that when they come over,
No.
You know, especially the paint booth. That was my favorite thing under the layout, is the paint booth. So as you were talking, I was able to find this picture, and I want to share it because I think that you'll probably be pretty impressed with what Mike has done. Let me see if I can bring it up here somehow. Share screen. Here we go. Okay. Oh, here we go. I had to re-share my screen. Check this out. This is the number 28. It's
Wow.
obviously in this picture, it's not painted yet.
No,
He has since,
but-
yeah.
Yeah. Not having it painted is a way you can judge models, because it's really obvious what he's done and the extent. And, you paint it all black and a lot of that stuff disappears. Very good.
But I was really impressed when I saw it. I was like, oh, wow, look at this. I mean, I knew he was working on it. And, I think that someday we'll be having this conversation and Mike will be inspiring people with his modeling.
Yeah. I
That's my
remember
guess.
when he first came over, his mom brought him over, couldn't drive yet. And he brought, maybe a second or third time he came over, he brought a Sierra engine with him and asked if he could run it on the layout. And unfortunately, I had to say, well, the Sierra never had an engine on the YV, so you can't run it.
Well, I mean, at least he didn't bring over Thomas or something like that, which would have been interesting. But here's another detail shot. I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, look at all that piping, right? I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, yeah, the angle on this one pipe here is wrong. I don't know that it is. It just looks impressive to me because there is a lot of detail going on there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, and this is, it's a scratch built. Now, I don't know to what degree. I know he started with a chassis, but I don't know. It would be interesting. I don't know if Mike is able to call in or not, but if you are, Mike, and you're interested in calling in, you're welcome to, because I have some questions about the model, to be honest. But anyway.
Well, let me tell you another judging story that I just remembered. And again, this is a long time ago, but there was a guy that would come to quarterly meets with traction equipment, whatever that is called. And the models were just terrible. And this is when the contest judge was the guy that got 135 points. And so we'd be talking about, oh man, this is, 3 points. And he'd come over and say, like, hang on. The guy scratch built it. He took aluminum cans and smashed them flat to make the body. So he gets some points for construction. He's not going to get 40 points, but you got to give him credit that he didn't just go buy some brass, and so forth. And he would always get a first place because no other, he was the only one that entered that contest because traction modeling was not very popular. Mm-hmm. So he'd get first place with 25 points. And I knew I kind of felt sorry for him because I recognized that his wife had passed away, and these cars were named for his wife. He would have the wife's name, and which was not conventional in those days, to name a piece of equipment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that kind of goes back to something that you were talking about earlier that I wanted to ask you about, because I've heard you talk about this before, but I don't know that we've ever talked in depth about it. But you were talking earlier and you used the word, what risks did they take? I'm kind of curious if you'd talk a little bit about that, because I know that in judging, you have to determine what the challenge was, right? And that's really what you're talking about when you're talking about risk, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think when you're judging, you think about it that much, but weathering is an obvious challenge. For some people, it's just, no sweat. But every single model that I build, I paint it and letter it, dull coat. And then I remember one car, I don't remember which one it was. I might have even mentioned this. It sat for several days before I was maybe it was the crane, because I spent 6 months on it. And I thought, oh man, am I going to screw this up when I start weathering it?
Yeah, it was the crane.
Yeah. And so that's a risk. If you scratch build your windows instead of buy commercial windows, you're doing two things. You're putting more work into it, and you're taking a risk because a purchased window is going to be absolutely square. You make your own window, and it could be a little lopsided. You can draw them in 3D, like I do now, and no sweat. Which all the windows needed for for YV stations are available for Grant Line. Several decades ago, I knew the Grant Line, the brothers. I was intimidated by the father, Cliff Grant. But I was talking to one of the brothers, had to be at least 30 years ago. And he just happened to mention that windows are their biggest seller on the Grant Line. They have a lot of windows, and a lot of them are for narrow gauge prototypes, Colorado, because that's what the father was interested in, and the sons. And I said, would you be willing to come out with some YV windows? And he said, yeah, send me some plans. So there's one building left that the windows are there, and it's a typical window that was used in a lot of the stations. And so I went up, measured it to the eighth of an inch. And sent him a drawing and all the dimensions. And I didn't hear anything for 6 months. And one day I get a package in the mail, and here's all these windows, 3 different types of windows. And I measured it with my micrometers, digital micrometers, and they were right on the money. And that's how they do things. If they're going to do it, they're going to do it accurately.
Yeah.
So
just takes a minute to get the molds, I guess.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Someone was mentioning about tools earlier, and Sydney was saying, and that might be something that's worth talking about since we have you on here, is you don't really necessarily need a whole lot of different tools, but you do need good tools. And we've had that conversation.
Yeah.
You want to talk about tools for a second since we have you on? No one's asking questions about the AP, so we might as well talk about this.
I did mention that.
I was going to say, you must be intimidating people because we're not getting people calling in either. I'm going to blame you for that. It's your fault.
Well, tools, in the second video, or the first one we did that besides the layout one, I talked about several tools, for example, tweezers. Mm-hmm. And the tweezers I use are real high end. They're not from Micromart. They're not made in China. They're made in Germany, and they're what jewelers use. And several of the tools I bought way back then were expensive. Those were $15 for a pair of tweezers, but I've had them for 30 years, so that's $2 a year. Now I've bought tools that I've only used once, but like certain power tools. I bought a small lathe, wood lathe, which was about $125 as I recall, and I used it to make the telephone poles for that O-scale diorama for my weed burner. I haven't bought many tools recently because I have all the tools I need.
Right.
Files will wear out if you use them enough. I think I talked about the one of the saws I use and mentioned it in the video and wrote to the manufacturer, who was pretty small. I mean, the guy works out of his house, and he was very happy with it. And he sent me another one with the upgraded one, the one that's easier to put a new blade in. But I think I really believe in buying quality tools. They will last a long time. They may seem expensive at the time, but like I say, over a period of time.
It's funny, Jack. When you said he was really small, I thought you meant like 3 feet tall. So, Heath is asking about tool. Well, Heath also had a question about your shop being so organized and clean, and was wondering if you got it cleaned up for our live stream, and I'm pretty sure you didn't.
Well, I do for this, because usually this table has a bunch of stuff on it, stuff I'm working on.
Yeah.
And, right now I'm building some cabooses, and so I have a binder that has all my drawings, and I have a stack of photos, and the sides for one caboose that I've already cut out on my Cricut are sitting on the workbench, and, parts are round and so forth. So it's not this clean when I'm not being televised.
Right. Not during a project either, right? Because that part over your right shoulder would have all kinds of stuff on it where your task lamps are.
Yeah. Well, and in one video I mentioned, when you can't find the tool you want, it's time to clean off your workspace. And I get to that point, I cut things, and now I'm looking around, and now where did that part go? And,
Right. I've done that even myself, not even being into it like you are. I've done DCC installs where suddenly I have all this crap on my workspace and I can't find the tool that I'm looking for, even though it's right there. It's just such a cluttered mess that you don't see that it's there, right?
Yeah. Well, this shop takes up our second largest bedroom. So it's about 11 by 12 or something. In the last video, I was standing next to El Portel and talking about my previous shop, which was nice, except it was very cold in the winter because it was in what people around here call a garage. I call it a layout room. You can't open the garage door anymore. Actually, because cold air was coming through the garage door, because it's just a single piece of plywood. So years ago, what I did is I built a fake door on the driveway, and it was the size of the garage door. It had weatherproofing on it, and I lifted it up and bolted it to the existing garage door and got it painted right away, because you cannot, in California, you can't enclose your garage. You have to, the door has to work. But if you drove by, you would see that there's no handle on the garage door. You can't open it, and it's actually bolted. So that shop was cold, and so when we got the chance, I moved it in here. But one thing I had on that shop was under where I built things, I had a pull-out. It's kind of like a drawer, but it was only about this thick, and it was just the frame, and it had some cloth there. And so you'd pull it out, and the side next to me was rounded. So you'd pull it up right next to your belly, and if you're cutting something and you drop it, it would drop into there.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, well, I thought so too, but I never used it. I wish I had it here, because I'm always dropping. I guess maybe because you're older. I'm dropping parts all the time. I cut them, and then where did that go?
Right. It might even be easier just to cut another part, right?
A lot of times, unless you have 12 queen posts you need, and you're cutting the 12th one down, and that's the one you lose, and that's the only one you got left. Then I'm down on my knees, running my hand around the carpeting with this big magic or big flashlight, trying to catch it. So
I took apart an N-scale locomotive yesterday because I'm working on a project where I'm going to replace a decoder in it, and the number board fell out of the front of this diesel locomotive. I mean, I can't show you with my fingers how small this thing was. So I had on my visor and I had my LED light right over the carpet. Well, I mean, it's not carpet, it's a rug under my chair over here. And I found it. I couldn't believe my eyes. It's like a little blue thing. And I found it because it was blue. Then I put it back in and I realized that the headlight lens had also fallen. I couldn't find it. So I had to order a new headlight. It was basically ordering the glass for a N-scale locomotive from Kato. So I spent $16 to get one little tiny lens. But I mean, it has to be right because it's going to be on a video. So there was a question that I saw come up here that I thought was, there it is, that I thought was actually an interesting question for you.
Yes, I have built stuff that's not YV, freight cars.
Right.
Those are resin kits. But
there's the caveat, though. I know where you're going with this. The caveat is that they would have appeared on the YV in 1939, right?
Likely. And I think we did one video where I talk about all the freight cars that I had built, painted, weathered, and I realized were inappropriate.
Right.
They were just too far from home. And you know, if you were modeling a more typical layout where you have through traffic, you know, you're modeling a big railroad and you have a lot of off layout staging over here and more over here, and you're moving cars through the layout, and that's all you do, then anything goes within reason. A lot of people don't care. But when you're modeling a railroad that's dead end and you're getting all your cars from the SP or stuff that's coming through, you know, like tank cars, there was a distributor for Standard Oil distributor in El Portal, and they owned the GATX, I think it is, some tank cars. So that was the only tank car that was ever seen on the YV.
Right.
So, you know, most people wouldn't care. You know, you could still say, you know, if I had some box cars that were not prototype or anything, would a visitor say anything? No. Would I care? Hell yes. And I wouldn't have them on the layout.
Right. And that goes to the whole idea of you have to build stuff for yourself. You know,
Yeah.
if you didn't care, I'm sure that the layout would be populated with all kinds of foreign stuff. I know a lot of people just buy stuff because they like the way it looks. Like, oh, look, this great northern car from 1950. I'll put it on my 1939, you know, YV layout. Why not? It's my layout. You know, that's not your style, obviously, but there's plenty of people do stuff like that. There's a question from Dave. I know that you know Dave, or at least you know of Dave. He wants to know, right?
Yep.
He wants to know if you're using a pre-existing mechanism, if it limits the amount of points you can earn on your certificate. I think it's a good question.
It might keep you from getting some points, but you should be able to still get 87.5 points. I haven't looked at the qualifications for a long time, but they don't expect you to make your own motor, for example.
God, that would be hard, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, there's people who would do that. The guy that built that locomotive,
Right.
he made his own motor.
Right.
But there's things that, you know, for drivers, you're not expected to make your drivers. You're not expected to make your own wheel sets or so forth. If you do, you get more points. You don't lose points.
I think that answers the question pretty well. Well, we're getting down to the last 10 minutes here. I'm going to put the link in here one more time, just in case anybody wants to call in with a question. Do want to ask, I had a question that I thought of while we were talking, and it keeps coming back and going away.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, right. I mean, I hate that. I was just telling, I went to the doctor this week, and I was telling her that I have trouble remembering words. Like, I can tell you the definition of the word. I can tell you a sentence you could use the word in, but I can't think of the word. And it's just infuriating because I have a decent vocabulary. I just can't use it because I can't remember anything. I mean,
it hasn't shown up in our normal conversations.
Well, or it did, and you didn't know either. Right.
So you had a question.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it was now. It had to do with the decision that you were making on your layout. And it was something that I think we've talked about before, but I thought it would be an interesting thing to talk about for the people that are watching. It had to do with, I know what it was. This whole concept of, okay, so in the very beginning of this show, you said that your layout is done. And I see it time and again, always 100 times a day, especially on social media. People say that my layout will never be done and that kind of thing. And it kind of feeds into that whole concept of, if you're going to model a prototype specifically and have your era, or in your case, your month, right, figured out, and you know what was on it because you've obtained the records of what ran that month from wherever you got those records, and you know the line because you have maps of the line, you can finish it. But the second part, and I think it's a really simple but really profound concept, is that if you model a prototype that accurately, you don't have to worry about planning like your track plan. It's already done for you because the railroad that you're modeling had to work, and they figured it out. They did all the guesswork for you because they figured out whatever switching problems there might be, and they built it in a way that worked because railroads have to work. And I've always thought that was a really interesting, approach to it, because a lot of people say it's so hard to model a prototype, but in a way, it's easier to model a prototype than it is to make stuff up, because when you make stuff up, now you do have to do all that problem solving. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and thinking back, if I had gotten into model railroading, well, I started as a freelancer, but I picked a prototype because I was influenced by this friend that was doing prototype freight cars. I don't know how I would have designed a layout. Where do you start? What do you want? And I read about people that a yard doesn't work out, and they're ripping out tracks because they didn't work out.
Sure.
I think Dave Adams mentioned that in his video, or one of the things. But to finish a layout, I had never thought about finishing it, but I never thought that it would go on forever. And what I ended up doing is, every time I build it, and I had a list of structures that I wanted, and some things got added and some things got taken off. But eventually, I got to the point where I had one more structure to build, and I was comfortable that was going to be it. There was no other place, nothing that I needed. And so when I finished that, I knew I was done with the structures. Of course, the track was all done. It had been done for decades. But when I finished structures, I would say there's 3 little houses in El Portal. When I built those, I put them on the layout, and then I added the details that seemed appropriate. Any more scenery. I had that big tree that fell over, and a couple of little kids are playing cowboys and Indians, and some other little details that seemed appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And I was done. And then over here is done. There's only scenery between there and the next building, and that one had already had its details. And so all these places, and that also pushed me to say, okay, if I build this building for El Portal will be done. And And so when I finished that very last structure and I put some kids playing baseball next to it, and I thought, I'm done. And I made a list of some trees I needed to replace, and the layout was done. I have not added a thing to the layout ever since 2013 when I finished it.
Right. You know, what might be kind of an interesting video to make for the ongoing series that we've been working on over the years is, how did you decide on the colors in the room? You don't have to answer this question. I'm just thinking out loud right now, because the way that the room is decorated, it really draws your attention to the layout. Like, that's what you're in there to see, and that's what you see. And part of the most recent video we did, where we were looking under the layout and you were showing how it's all finished cabinetry and no curtains with models falling out, I think adds to that experience where you're there to see a layout and that's what you notice when you walk in. And I haven't really analyzed it really heavily, but I'm sure that you could. I wouldn't be surprised if you also designed the way where the lights are positioned, for example, because the way everything is presented or presents itself, you don't notice things like that. And usually, to me, when you don't notice something, that means it was done well. Like, when I don't notice bad edits in a video, just because that's what I do, if I don't notice edits, it was done well, because I see stuff like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I've mentioned before, I had a prior layout that was just a test bed. Mm-hmm. It was never going to be permanent. I wanted to get my skills better on hand laying track and so forth. And so it was on three sides of the garage. And so one side was out in the valley, and I painted that wall a color of yellow like the grass. And the other wall was up in the canyon, so I painted that wall green. And that didn't work. The green didn't work. But the idea of having the room color match the scenery did. And so that's where I got the kind of it's not a bright yellow, it's kind of it's a yellow you don't think about.
Yeah, it's almost a tannish or something.
Yeah, it's supposed to just drop back, and it does a pretty good job of that.
Yeah.
A lot of people, especially back east, they want their fascias green. Well, that doesn't work in California because we don't have green grass in April or August.
Yeah, we do in April, but not August.
Yeah, and so the fascia is supposed to just go away.
Mm-hmm.
And so so a lot of those were very intentional kind of things I learned along, and we can talk about it more sometime in the future and actually share that.
Yeah. One other thing that I've always been kind of blown away about, and it's in the layout to our video of your layout. You said something that I think a lot of people who know your reputation as being this really good scratch builder, someone who builds stuff, you can build anything if you have a plan, which feeds into what I'm going to say. Because you said on the video, if you told me to build a gas station, I'd say, sure, give me a picture or some plans. But if you just want me to make it up, I can't do it. I thought that was such a great, honest comment.
Yeah, totally honest. And I don't have plans. I've done some buildings that, excuse me, I just have photos. And right now I'm working on drawings for these cabooses, and I have a few photos, and I know the interior length and interior width, and that's all I know. And so I spent a lot of time drawing it up first, and then go from there. So
yeah, we've talked about that too. Part of the reason, and a good, I think, process is to draw it up and see if it looks right? Because then you haven't invested any time building yet, but you can see stuff that maybe just doesn't look correct or whatever. So,
well, if you're modeling a prototype and you build something and call it that station, and it doesn't look like the photos, then it's not a prototype.
Yeah, it's certainly not a signature scene, right? Because it's not something you could recognize.
Yeah, but again, and I think that does two things. One is that's how I do things, but it makes things fit for a visitor that has never seen a photo of any building I've built, but they appear correct because they're based on a real building. And the designer of that building had some objectives that he wanted to meet
Yeah.
So
It all goes to plausibility, right? I mean, something could be fictional and still appear real. We've talked about that before, and you've talked about that in the model railroading with Jack Burgess series. So there's a couple questions. We're done. I mean, we've gone for 2 hours, but there's a couple questions I thought were interesting. Do you have time to maybe take a couple of those real quick?
sure.
Okay, so this one of them is up on the screen, and I thought it was an interesting question. And I'm assuming that Joey's talking about if you're building a model railroad based on a novel that details a railroad, even if it was a fictional novel, is that still prototypical? And I would think the answer is no, because doesn't prototypical mean it is something that exists in real life?
Yeah, it would have to meet a real prototype, not something that's written up, because then you could say you have a story or maybe a book about a fictional railroad. In fact, I'll give you an example. There was a guy who came out, and I've actually talked to the guy, but he came out with a book on what if the YV had not been scrapped and it still existed. Now there's some fallacies, that it did wash out several times, and it takes too long to get up there, so forth. But he envisioned this railroad and he even drew up drawings of a passenger car with solar panels on the top. Well, you could build a model of that based really right on his drawing, but it wouldn't be prototype nor practical because you can't have enough solar panels to power that kind of a vehicle. So he's lost the engineering in the fantasy. So what he was envisioning just wouldn't work. And actually, he got in touch with me, now that I think about 15 years ago, and asked if I would be willing to build up a large-scale model of what he was thinking of, of that he was going to then try to raise funding for this whole concept of building it again. And I wouldn't do it. And he eventually decided, I think before I told him I wouldn't do it, he decided he was going to do it himself. I think maybe he realized I was too prototype to do what he wanted. But
or it's like we were just talking about before. If he didn't have full drawings of it, you couldn't do it.
No.
Because what are you supposed to do? Make it up? That's just not your style. I mean, and now I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I just want to be clear about that. I think that there's a place for fictional stuff and proto-lance and even just pure fantasy layouts. I think if that's what you're into, that's great. As long as you're enjoying yourself, you're doing it right? I mean,
well, and you could have you don't have to model a prototype, a real railroad. You can have your Aiken Back Railroad and have some cars on it, which are prototype and lettered for a real railroad, and get points for it.
Sure. I meant to ask that earlier, if you could get points on a fantasy model, and I guess the answer is you can.
Yeah.
I knew that you could, but I thought it would be a good question for people to hear in our conversation. So the last one was the one that came up down here. That's suggestions for someone who's interested in getting into prototype modeling. And I think you're pretty fully qualified to answer that question, since you're probably the single hardest core, if that's a word, prototype modeler that I'm aware of.
Well, and what I would suggest is to model a popular prototype railroad. I picked one that there were no engines, there were no cars, there were no cabooses, there were nothing for it. And part of that was, it was not because I wanted to scratch build them, it's because I couldn't afford anything else. I might have mentioned that in those days, brass models were coming out that hobby shops were buying. So they were not, and it was a friend of mine, the guy that got the YV ones done, that changed that he brought them in on order. You ordered it before it was made, and then you bought it. You had a down payment, and then you got it when you paid it off, as opposed to hobby shops having them. And I didn't want to go into a hobby shop every month, and there's a brass model of exactly what I want for $250, which there's no way I can afford. But now, if you model diesels, for example, you can buy ones that are not really expensive, that are your prototype, or you can buy ones that are now $250 and come with decoders and lights and everything. I don't think they're that much, but I know they're getting up there in price.
No, Jack, actually, you're estimating low. They're higher than that now.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
So,
you could
so
go
maybe
on
you want to model something that the stuff is on eBay.
Right. One of the big comments on social media, the very commonly seen comments, is how expensive everything is, and people are going to not start the hobby because it's too expensive. And
but they're buying it.
Yeah, people are buying it. Yeah. So anyway, well, look, we've gone for longer than 2 hours. I want to thank you. Michelle didn't get to call in. I know that she wanted to, but she popped in on the chat and said that the weather wasn't so great, so their internet connection was a little wonky over in Maui. But I know that she wanted to thank you for filling in for her. I also want to thank you for filling in for her. I think it's a great opportunity that people had to ask you questions, and that's not something that we get to do too often. So thank you so much, Jack.
Well, I enjoyed it. These are fun.
Maybe we'll do it again sometime, and maybe we can just have whatever topic people want, or maybe we can just BS. It'll be like behind the scenes at one of our shoots, except without me cussing.
Well, you would have to do it far enough in the future that I don't remember what I talked about this time.
So you can tell the same story.
Might. Yeah, they say, "Oh, I've heard that story before." Click.
Well, it's like I said, don't give them a reason to turn the channel, Jack. So don't do that. You'll have to like watch this over and over so you remember what you talked about. That way we don't give people a reason to turn off, right?
Yeah, I can't remember the stories I talked about on the ones we've already done. So.
Oh well, whatever. It is what it is. So thank you. I do want to mention, I always do this and I always forget what's coming up. Could you please hand me my calendar over here? I always like to mention what's coming up on the weekend when we do these shows. And there it is. Oh, cool. This is one that you'll have no interest in, Jack, but it'll be interesting for a lot of people. This weekend, we have Toy Trains 101, where my friend Kevin Hill talks about batteries inside locomotives of toy trains. So again, I know that's not something you're interested in, Jack, but a lot of people will enjoy that. So make sure you tune in on Saturday at 9 a.m. for that. And we're going to go. So thanks, Jack. Again, appreciate it. And it's always good talking to you. Hopefully we'll come up with a plan sometime soon for the next episode of Model Railroading with you. Thanks for watching, everybody. And hang in there for a minute, Jack. I'm going to talk to you after the credits roll, okay?
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.